This morning we are beginning this series, and we've titled this series from the book of Exodus, Redemption from Slavery, right? And we're going to be walking through, and we're not going to go passage by passage. At some points we will do that, but there are sections where we will kind of cover a few chapters, but for the next several weeks we're going to be in the book of Exodus. And even as you encounter the book of Exodus, there's going to be two levels we're going to be looking at it. One, there's definitely places in the book of Exodus where you're looking at how God is dealing with the children of Israel, and the commands he gives them and how they are responding to God. And all of that are wonderful lessons for us individually, right? In some way, we're going to be reading this and applying this very individually, right? We're going to be seeing how is God speaking to us, what is God teaching us, what are things that we need to obey, what are things that we need to confess, all of those wonderful things, application individually. But I also want us to kind of have a global, redemptive, kind of gospel perspective as we come to this book. Right? Because even as God is redeeming his people from Egypt, this is what God is doing to all of creation, all of humanity, as God redeems us from slavery, sin, and death through his ultimate deliverer, the Lord Jesus Christ. Right? So all of this is a foreshadow of what is coming. So I want you to kind of just definitely apply it individually, but I also want you to see the awesome work of God across cultures, across history, across time, as he is redeeming a people for himself, right? So read it in two levels, individual and a kind of global gospel level, right? Even as we look at this chapter, right, definitely there are seasons in our lives, and maybe you're in a season in your life right now where sometimes you really feel lost. You really feel like, God, what is happening in my life? What is happening? I feel like I'm not moving in a certain direction. I feel like there are so many roadblocks in my life. I feel like I've lost some sense of purpose. What is my destiny? What's happening? Even in this large city, you may feel lost sometimes. And there are seasons where we go through periods like that, right? Where is my career heading? Where am I heading? Right? What does my future look like? Am I going to make it? Right? The movie The Lion King, where Simba goes through a similar kind of thing, right? Of course, it's a kind of a Disney, but they bring out some of these human emotions, right? And Simba is promised to be the Lion King, right? He is promised to be the young lion prince, and he's destined to be king of the Pride Lands. But his father Mufasa dies, and due to treachery and tragedy, Simba lives in exile, right? He kind of is living by himself. He lives in exile. He's living under this guilt and under shame and under fear. He's kind of cut himself off from his family. In that moment, as he is feeling lost in that season of his life, he's lost his purpose. He's lost his destiny. He has lost his identity. He feels forgotten and abandoned. Just wandering the wilderness, right? And sometimes we feel that way. We feel lost. Where am I heading? What is this? What is going on in life? Right? And even as you look at the book of Exodus, you're going to see in chapter 1, you're going to see here is the children of Israel who seem to be lost. They're lost. They're lost in a foreign land. They seem to have been forgotten and abandoned by God. They had a promise. They had a purpose. We're going to see that. But now they seem to be a people who are hopeless in slavery, right? But as you look at the story of Exodus, you're going to see the story of how God redeems his people into a relationship. He's redeeming them, right? And he's changing them, their status from slavery to become sons and daughters of God. Let's begin with verse 1, and there's a quick introduction, and we're going to jump into the rest of the passage. In verse 1, you see, these are the names of the sons of Israel who came to Egypt with Jacob, each with his household, right? Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, and Benjamin, Dan, and Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. All the descendants of Jacob were 70 persons. So when they come into Egypt, there are 70 people. Joseph was already in Egypt. Right, so God promises Abraham, and God promised to make him a great nation, right? And then he has Isaac and Jacob. Jacob has 12 sons. And these 12 sons One of the son is Joseph, and they basically are very jealous of Joseph, and they sell him as a slave. Right, we see all this in Genesis. Right, they sell him in as a slave. Joseph moves to Egypt, but during that time he is in Potiphar's house, and he's in jail, and all of those things. But God raises him up in Egypt, and during that time there is an intense famine in Canaan. Right, and there's famine in Egypt as well. And so, because of this famine, the brothers look for food, and they come to Egypt. And they encounter Joseph. We see that in the later parts of Genesis, where Joseph graciously forgives his brothers, even though they sold him as a slave. Joseph forgives and saves the family. And this is where the children of Israel, right, the children of Jacob, the Israel, they are living in Egypt, and they begin to thrive. Right, there are 70 people at this moment. And verse 6 it says, and this is where the story picks up. Verse 6: Then Joseph died, and all his brothers, and all that generation. Right? So through Joseph, God not only saves the children of Israel, God saves the people of Egypt as well. Verse 7, but the people of Israel were fruitful and increased greatly. They multiplied and grew exceedingly strong, so that the land was filled with them. Now here you see a kind of the echo of Genesis 1. Right? You see an echo of Genesis 1:28. In Genesis 1:28, God said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. That was the command God gave to Adam and Eve. But because of sin, because of rebellion, they were exiled from Eden. Evil was ramping up. They lost their purpose. And God calls one man, Abraham, and he promises to him in Genesis chapter 12, verse 1, go from your country, your kindred, your father's house to the land that I will show you. I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. Right? And so we kind of track this promise and a people. Right? We are tracking this through Genesis. What's happening to God's promise to Abraham? What's happening to God's command to be fruitful and multiply in Genesis 1, the promise in Genesis 2, and we are tracking them. And here we see the children of Israel basically living out God's promise. What God intended for them, they are actually living it out in Egypt. They are fruitful and they are multiplying. And look at all the words that are used. They are fruitful, they increased greatly, they multiplied, they grew exceedingly strong, the land was filled with them. All of these words to really describe what's happening. They are flourishing. They're living out what God had intended for them. Okay. But in this chapter, you're going to see the promise and the people are coming under a threat. So this morning, I've titled this sermon, God of Promise. Right? God of promise. A God of promise. And we're going to see, right? And the first thing we're going to see is unrelenting threats. Unrelenting threats. They suddenly find themselves in a position where the promise is threatened, the people are threatened. Okay? Let's look at verse 6. It says, Joseph died. Verse 7, the people of Israel were fruitful and greatly multiplied. Verse 8, now there arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph. And he said to his people, behold, the people of Israel are too many and too mighty for us. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply. And if war breaks out, they join our enemies and fight against us and escape from the land. What's happening? Joseph dies, and of course there are several generations that are passed by this time, and there is a new king in Egypt, a new pharaoh who does not know about Joseph, or maybe he knows and he doesn't care about Joseph. He's forgotten. The people have forgotten Joseph. The people have forgotten how it was through Joseph that Egypt was actually saved from the famine. They've forgotten all of that. And the moment you forget, forgetfulness breeds fear. Forgetfulness breeds anxiety. Forgetfulness breeds all kinds of desperation. Forgetfulness makes you afraid. Forgetfulness makes you grumble. We see this not only for the Egyptians. We will continue to see this in the book of Israel, for the children of Israel. We will see this in our lives. Any moment we forget about what God has done for us. We forget about what God is doing through his people in our lives. The moment we forget, it breeds all kinds of fear and anxiety in our lives. And so they've forgotten, right? They've forgotten. And because of that, there is tremendous fear about these people. They are not like us. They don't speak our language. There's going to be tremendous fear, right? And they are fueled by fear. And this whole oppression is out of this fear. Look at what they do, verse 11. Verse 11. Therefore, they set taskmasters over them to afflict them with heavy burdens. And I want you to just trace the expressions here. As much as there are expressions of multiplying and fruitful and strong and grew exceedingly and filled and all of those wonderful expressions that talk about the flourishing of God's people, you see there are equal or even more expressions of oppression, right? They set taskmasters to afflict them with heavy burdens. They built for Pharaoh store cities, Pithom and Ramesses. But the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied and the more they spread abroad. And the Egyptians were in dread of the people of Israel. So they ruthlessly made the people of Israel work as slaves. They made their lives bitter with hard service. In mortar and brick and in all kinds of work in the field. In all their work, they ruthlessly made them work as slaves. You begin to see intense oppression. There is a threat. There is an intense threat to the promise of God and to the people of God. Intense, right? This is not just some opposition from the... No. There is intense physical, emotional, and spiritual oppression. They are in slavery over a taskmaster who are ruthless, right? And this is their plan. They thought, okay, we're going to make them busy. We're going to burden them. We're going to beat them down so that they will not have any time for a family. They're not going to have any time for family. They're not going to have any kind of time to have children. No, we are going to just work them. We are going to just make them work and work and work. And hopefully during that time, they will fall sick. Maybe they will die. They will not have time. This is how we're going to control them, right? But it doesn't work. It doesn't work. Right? And we see in verse 12, they are continuing to multiply and they continue to spread abroad. They're expanding. So verse 15, the strategy changes. Then the king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Shiphrah and the other Puah, when you serve as midwife to the Hebrew women and see them on the birth stool, if it is a son, you shall kill him. And if it is a daughter, she shall live. So they're instructing the midwives. They're telling the midwives, well, kill the boys, let the girls live. Why? Because the girls can easily be assimilated into the Egyptian culture as slaves. They can take them in, and then the Israelites are wiped out, right? They will assimilate, and there's no identity, there's no culture. But even that is not working. The instruction to kill the boys, that's not working. Right? Why? Because the midwives are telling, they didn't follow God's command. And they're saying, the Hebrew wives, before we reach, right? It's a little funny, but that's what they're saying. It's probably true. It's probably because the Pharaoh is not kind of debating that idea, right? It's probably true. Before they reach, the Hebrew wives are giving birth. But even at the back of the mind, they're like, no, we are not going to follow his command. So it's not working. It's not working again. Again, they are thriving, they are flourishing. And look at the intensity increasing. The intensity of oppression and the systemic nature of oppression is increasing. Look at verse 22. Then Pharaoh commanded all his people, not just the midwives, all his people, every son that is born to the Hebrews, you shall cast into the Nile. But you shall let every daughter live. It's not just to a few midwives. He's telling all of the people of Egypt, say, hey, if you see a boy that is born for the Hebrews, throw him into the Nile. Let the God of our river deal with them. Right? You begin to see evil thrive. Chaos is thriving. The destruction everywhere. This relentless and ruthless oppression. The promise and people are under intense threat. The opposition seems to be increasing more and more. Evil seems to be ramping up more and more. Violence, right? So the question that comes to our minds is, and I'm sure it's been in the minds of the people, all of those generations, where is God when we are suffering? Where is God? Where is God here? And I'm sure maybe you're thinking, is it because we've sinned? Is God punishing us? Is God punishing them? No, but that's probably what they're thinking, right? And that's what we think as well. Is God punishing us? Has God forgotten us? Has God abandoned us? What is happening? Why is this happening? When the sons are being killed and the families are grieving and are in pain, God seems distant and absent. Where is our comforter? Where is our deliverer? Yet you realize these are the people of God. In the midst of oppression, in the midst of all these challenges, they are the people of God. They are the people of God. God has not abandoned them. God has not forgotten them. Right? God is not silent. They are under a divine command. They are holding on to a divine promise. They are hoping and waiting for a divine intervention. And this is and throughout the book of Exodus, we can actually relate a lot to this, right? And maybe you are in a place of suffering even today, and you feel, has God abandoned me? Is God punishing me? Why is God not answering my prayer? Why is not God intervening in my life? And so we assume God is absent. We assume God is not involved. We assume God is uncaring. We assume God is incapable. But you're going to see, no, that is not true. But the opposite is true. God is present. God is involved. God is caring. God is capable. But in some way, in His sovereign plan, even what's happening in Egypt is part of His plan. Even what's happening in Egypt, right? Because in Genesis 15, God had already told Abraham what's going to happen. God is not surprised by this, right? God had already told in Genesis 15:13, God told Abraham that the Lord said to Abraham, know for certain that your offspring will be sojourners in a land that is not theirs, and will be servants there, and they will be afflicted for 400 years. But I will bring judgment on the nation that they serve, and afterward they shall come out with great possessions, right? And we're going to see, sometimes we go through experiences in life without any explanation. We don't understand, right? We are able to look back and see, okay, there are certain things that's happening. With 70 people, they are not going to conquer the land, right? That's not going to happen. So God is actually taking them to Egypt so that they will thrive. God is actually, even if they thrive, what about possessions? What about all of these things? When they're going to leave Egypt, man, they're going to come out with all kinds of possessions. So God is orchestrating His plan in mysterious ways. And even in that plan, when Satan is threatening to kill the promise and the people, God is at work. He is not giving up. Right? Even the suffering, God is going to turn out for their good. God is present in their suffering. But I want to understand, there is a relentless threat to the promise and people right here. I remember, and I've shared this before, this is part of our story. And I remember when we moved to Dallas to study, right? And it was an important stage of our life. Deepa and I got married. We were in Chennai for a year. And then we knew God was moving us out of the city to study, right? So I had applied to different places, and finally I got into Dallas. Again, the provision of God, the grace of God. I mean, I got scholarship, I got everything, right? There's nothing I had. I mean, I didn't have any money or anything. So God provided all of those things, and God, in some way, removed us from our context to go to another context. And looking back, I know He's preparing us for Delhi and all of that, right? We go there. We're young, we want to travel. I know the country a little bit because I lived there before, so I'm a lot more prepared. So we go there. Within a year, after 1 year, right, 1.5 years, man, Deepa fell sick. Right? And again, I've shared this before. Every time I look back, it's part of our story, right? It's important for me to remember those times. Deepa has always grown up with a chronic issue, right? She's grown up with this chronic pancreatitis issue, right? From when she was 5 or something, they removed her gallbladder. And so because of that complication, she's always had pain. So even when we were young, we've always grown up knowing that Deepa always has pain. She's always lived with pain, right? And they were constantly treating her with different medicines, constantly treating her for pancreatitis. And so anyway, so we got married. So she's in Dallas. And we felt, okay, now it's time to just enjoy, right? But she fell sick, right? She was in tremendous pain, right? And I've thought about that a lot during that time. I've had people come and tell me, Ranjit, maybe you should leave. You should leave. Maybe you should go back home, right? It was intense. It was intense, right? There was no breathing room because Sanjana was 6 months old. I had to take care of her. I had to be a full-time student. I had to work to support the family. Deepa was in the hospital. It was intense. It was intense, right? Like, I won't know where to leave my daughter. Like, I need to go to class. Where do I leave my daughter? Deepa's in the hospital. It's not like my grandparents are sitting there. There's nobody there. And it was intense, intense. But looking back, when I see, God's plan, Baylor Hospital was 5 minutes from my place. Baylor Hospital is one of the best hospitals in the US. And they had one of the best liver surgeons in the US, right there, 5 minutes away from our place. They've been diagnosing Deepa for pancreatitis for 10, 12 years, and they've been treating her, right? And so we go to Baylor, and they said, okay, well, thank you, India Medicine. We're going to do our tests, right? We're going to do everything again. So they did every test again, did everything again. And they found a golf ball size stone in her liver. I'm like, what? How did you miss this? How did people miss this? How did they miss this? I'm like, I was mad. I was angry with the parents. I'm like, what doctor you been taking? Like, I'm like, but God had orchestrated everything, right? Even the intense suffering, there was a hospital 5 minutes away so that she could be treated, things could get back. And of course, she had to change a lot of things in her life, and she still struggles with pain. But you think about this. I want you to understand, in your suffering, a lot of times there's no explanation. We don't understand what's happening. We feel like, well, I'm thriving, I'm in seminary, God has given me the provision, God has given me the scholarship, God seems to have called me there to study, to prepare us for future. I'm in God's will, doing all of these wonderful things, and yet why? Why are we suffering? Why are we suffering? Why is there pain? Why we are not able to pay for hospital bills? We are under intense pressure. Why? And I want you to understand, the life of a believer has both blessing and bitter circumstances. And oftentimes we are like, well, if I am a child of God, I don't want any bitter circumstances. No. You need to understand God's plan is much more sovereign, and He's going to work. He's going to work even through those bitter circumstances. He is working to change your bitter circumstances. So we see there is unrelenting threat for the people in promise. They had no idea what is happening. But we're going to see God is at work. The second thing we see here is not only unrelenting threat, but unexpected help. Unexpected help. Right? Even from unlikely people, right? Let's see what happens. Look at this. They're under intense pressure from Pharaoh, the ruler of the world at that time. And look at what's happening. Verse 15, right? 15, the king of Egypt said to Hebrew wives, one of them was Shiphrah and the other Puah, the midwives, right? And he is telling them, when you see them on the bird stool, if it is a son, you shall kill him. If it is a daughter, she shall live. But verse 17, look at verse 17. The midwives feared God and did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them, and let the male children live. Look at where help is coming from. There is a threat to the promise. There is a threat to the people from the most powerful man in the world, from the most powerful nation in the world. Nobody can stand against Pharaoh and his plans. He tells the people, kill the male children. No opposition. There is no opposition. They're like, yes, we will kill all the male children. Nothing. When he says it is done with that kind of a situation, look at where help is coming from. Look at how God is saving these male children, these boys. How is God saving? There are these two insignificant, ordinary women. And it's not just two. Of course, the commentators say they are probably leaders of all the midwives. There's not just two midwives in the whole land. They're probably just representatives of all the midwives. But they are the one who are leading all the midwives, right? So their names are mentioned. These are insignificant, ordinary, marginalized women. I want you to understand. I want you to understand the state. These are women who are carrying personal grief, because one of the things that you can safely assume, and commentators agree on this, is that the reason why they are midwives is because they don't have their own children. They are barren. And so they've given their life to helping other women bear children. So it is safe to assume that they're probably barren. So they are carrying personal grief. They're carrying public disgrace. In that culture, if you're not able to have children, well, your family cannot, your name cannot be taken forward. So it is a disgrace. Maybe people are thinking, well, maybe you're cursed. Maybe you've sinned. Maybe God is punishing you. All of these things, and they're carrying this kind of a personal grief and pain and a public disgrace. Everybody knows, and they're looking down on them. It is these kind of insignificant, ordinary women who are carrying pain, and God is going to do something. And I want you to understand, sometimes we understand, we can relate to this. And I'll tell you why you need to observe what's happening here. Because it is easy for these women to get into a cynical mindset. They can easily, hey, I don't have any children. God is not answering my prayer. Maybe God is punishing me. God has abandoned me. Personally, maybe they are carrying this hurt and bitterness. It's possible. They could be carrying, and they could form a very cynical approach to God. Where is God? Why is he not answering my prayer? What is the point of following God? What is all this? It is easy to become cynical when you're going through suffering, right? It is easy. It is easy to become very selfish and inward looking when you're suffering. But not these women. Not these women. Oh, not these women. Not these women, right? God had placed these women who had fearless faith in the midst of their suffering exactly where he wanted them to be. Exactly where he wanted them to be. And he is using even women who are going through just intense personal grief and suffering. And he says, no, I have placed you, even that suffering, right? Even that suffering. Think about this. Think about this. If Shifra and Pua had fearless faith. They had fearless devotion. If they had children, maybe they won't be there. They won't be there to save these children. So even the barrenness is part of God's sovereign plan. God is saying, no, I know you are going through personal grief, but can you see me beyond that? Can you be faithful? I know you don't have any explanation of why you are barren. I know you don't have an explanation of why you are suffering in a personal way, why this is happening to you. I know you have all these questions. I know you have all these doubts. I know you're battling cynicism. It is a temptation for you. I know that. But I have allowed certain things in your life, and I have placed you exactly where I want you to be. Even if you don't have your own children, you're going to be saving, the children of the nation. Unexpected help. Unexpected help. Why? Because in the midst of their suffering, they are fearless and they are faithful. They are fearless and faithful. And I want you to understand what's happening here. And it's a big reminder for us, especially in our country. In our country, right? I mean, we could be people who are working in a place for 20, 30 years and nobody knows we are a believer, right? It's easy for us to kind of hide and, right, do the matrix in our land, right? We do the spiritual matrix, right? Nobody knows. Nobody knows. Unless you have a last name like David, nobody knows who you are, right? You can live in this country and not know anybody know you are a believer. Romans 13:1, right? What's happening here? Are they lying? Man, Ranjit, God said don't lie. Why are they lying? Right? Why are they lying? No, let's look at what God's word says. Romans 13:1 says, let every person be subject to governing authorities. Therefore, whoever resists the authorities, resists what God has appointed. And those who resist will incur judgment. Titus 3:1 says, remind them to be submissive to rulers and authorities. And you're going to be constantly in places where you may have some wicked boss and they don't deserve your work, and you have to do some of these things. You have to follow leaders and laws and things like that in your life. But this is this is biblical wisdom. When governing authorities that are placed over you, you submit to them, you obey them. But when the governing authority commands you to disobey God, to violate what God is saying, you obey God and not man. Right? Don't flip this and tell God, well, you put this boss over me, so I have to obey him and disobey you. That is not what God is saying. Right? And so here, no, they are saying, no, we will fear God, not man. We will obey God, not man. Even if it means we will be out of favor with Pharaoh. Even if it means Pharaoh can actually become mean and angry with us. Even if it means Pharaoh is going to fire us. Even if it means Pharaoh might kill us. No. We're going to obey God. We're going to obey God at a great personal risk. Hey, we are going to be in positions like this constantly. Not necessarily life and death situation. But you're going to be in positions where there will be temptation to compromise. You're going to be in positions where, because of your personal suffering and your personal disappointment, you're going to be tempted to become cynical and compromise. You're going to be tempted to be cynical and lacking faith in a way that you don't want to be faithful to God. You want to compromise. Why? Cynicism breeds all of these things. But here we see the faithfulness of these two women, the fearlessness of these two women. And we see this throughout Scripture, right? I mean, throughout history. We've talked about this last week, the Corrie ten Boom story. I'm usually fascinated with these biographies, right? And I read this story when I was really young. Corrie ten Boom, basically they had a small watch shop. They had a watch shop. It's a family business. They're kind of doing that, right? And the government had said, well, you got to kill all the Nazis. You got to just take away all the Nazis. I mean, all the Jews, right? During the World War II. But this family decided to defy their order. They defied the order. They started hiding Jews from the Nazis in their home. And slowly they began to build a room, right behind Corey's bedroom. They had a false wall. You should actually see the movie also. It's called The Hiding Place. The book is Hiding Place. They built a false wall, and they had different ways they will communicate to people who are hiding there if the Nazis are coming. Oh, phenomenal. They got good at what they did. They saved 800 Jews, helped them escape, right? They defied the orders of the government. They said, no, this is not a godly thing. We will not. No, it doesn't matter if you are above me, you're my boss, if you're my governor, if you're my king. It doesn't matter. I have a greater king. At great personal cost. Did immediately were they honored with a nice medal? No, they were put in concentration camp. Right? They were put in concentration. The sister died and father died. Oh, they are going through intense suffering. But I want to understand, for us, no. God calls us to be faithful in the midst of personal cost, the midst of personal loss. 1 Samuel chapter 2 says, I will honor those who honor me. And you see that happening in verse 20, right? Here in Exodus, God dealt well with the midwives. And the people multiplied and grew very strong. And because the midwives feared God, he gave them families. What a beautiful grace of God. The grace of God. In the midst of unrelenting threats, God raises unexpected help. Lastly, unfailing God. Unfailing God. See, God is not mentioned a lot during these stages, but there is a God who's working behind the scenes. Every scheme of Pharaoh fails. Every scheme of Pharaoh fails. It backfires. God turns evil into good for his people. You're going to see this throughout the book. Even in the midst of oppression, they are flourishing. Even in the midst of a murdering scheme, they are multiplying. They are expanding. Right? When God seems hidden and absent, I want you to understand, no, he is working and he's present. He is with you and he's for you, especially when you're suffering. But this book is also not showing about God's faithfulness to his people. It is showing God's faithfulness to all of us. God not only keeps his promise to Abraham, God keeps his promise to all of mankind. He's going to prepare a deliverer through Moses who's going to come. In the midst of this suffering, he's going to bring out a deliverer. But God is also working to bring about Jesus into the world. As Israel bore the burdens, we have the true Israel, Jesus, who bore our burdens. And we're going to see this. Jesus, the true Israel, bore our burdens on the cross. He bore our shame and our suffering on the cross so that we can be set free. And we see the promise of God being fulfilled. God is unfailing. God is unstoppable. Satan thought Jesus will fail on the cross by dying, but Jesus was unstoppable. He rose from the grave and had victory on our behalf. God's plan is more powerful than any other plans in this world. So, my friends, even this morning, I want you to, in the midst of unrelenting threats, God is calling us to be people who are faithful. People who are faithful. Why? Because he is faithful. Because he never fails. He provides help. He sustains. He sustains us through miraculous ways. He is working even through the suffering. He is working to turn your suffering for your good. I'm reminded of this old hymn. It says, days of darkness will come over me. Sorrow's paths I often tread. But the Savior is still with me. By his hand, I'm safely led.